Star Trek first premiered in 1966, written by Gene Roddenberry as a western set in space, some 300 years in the future. It followed the crew of the USS Enterprise, the flagship of an organization called Starfleet, as they set out to find new life and civilizations and to explore strange new worlds. Television watchers of the late 60s were introduced to names that would become mainstays in American pop culture: Kirk, Spock, Bones, Scotty, and Uhura, just to name a few. The show didn't have a long run, their 5-year journey being cut short only after 3 seasons. But little did Roddenberry know, Star Trek would grow and evolve for the next 55 years. There have been many iterations of Trek, including 8 series set in different times and different locations and ships, as well as 13 movies. There has been a resurgence of Trek in recent years, with 3 series premiering since 2017 and 2 more announced for 2021 and 2022. Trek, since its very beginning, has been an allegory for the social issues that viewers may be dealing with. In the original series, characters such as Uhura or Spock were used to represent the civil rights movement. If man could not overlook issues of race and give up their ignorant ways and accept other human beings as human beings, how then, at the peak of the space race, could man be expected to embrace potential life forms that may exist out in the vast expanse of the universe? Some of the episodes are rather on the nose, such as the episode Let This Be Your Last Battlefield, where a half-black, half-white alien species destroys their own civilization due to their racism. In The Next Generation, it could be said that this otherness is still at play in the narrative, with Data, an android, acting as Pinocchio, trying desperately to become like and understand his human crewmates. His character could also be a metaphor for humanity's advances in technology. How far will technology go, and just what place will it have in the future? There are also storylines that speak to certain members of the population, like the character of Captain Sisko, acting as a single father to his son Jake while also running a space station in the middle of a war zone. For some in the 90s, Sisko represents a father figure that may have been absent in their lives. Aside from the actors on screen, writers for television use additional methods in order to convey the story in an emotionally satisfying way. This can be through visuals, like the way that Data looks and moves sets him apart from the rest of the crew. Or it can be seen in the uniforms that different characters wear, signifying their association and rank. Or even the establishing shots of whatever ship or planet that the story is taking place on. Music is also a key component of storytelling in Star Trek. In some cases, the music acts as a narrator for the action happening on screen. It could tell the viewer what to think. Like, this fight scene is intense because the Enterprise is outgunned by the Borg. This kind of music is called non-diegetic music. This is what you most likely think of when talking about a movie's soundtrack. The other kind of music often employed in storytelling is diegetic music, or source music. With this type of music, the audience can identify where the music is coming from in the scene: a radio, a string quartet, or Riker playing his trombone. It is understood that the music is heard by the characters. It exists in the same time and space. Star Trek has a history of having diegetic music in their various series. Beginning with the original series, the writers wanted the Enterprise to be alive, the characters to live just as people from the 1960s would have. This meant that they had to have music. Spock and Uhura were the musical characters, playing a Vulcan harp and singing. The Next Generation boasted its own musical talent, with many characters, both bridge crew and recurring roles, playing music. Captain Picard played his Reskin flute. Data played several instruments, but most often was seen playing the violin. Voyager featured the operatic stylings of Robert Picardo as the emergency medical hologram. And Deep Space Nine brought on James Darren in the last season as a recurring holographic lounge singer by the name of Vic Fontaine. Though my research went in depth on each of these characters and their music making, for the sake of this presentation, I will only be going into one character. And that character would be Captain Jean-Luc Picard, played by Sir Patrick Stewart. The Next Generation, which aired from 1987 to 1994, about 20 years after the cancellation of the original series, takes place in the 24th century. The Enterprise D, the new flagship of Starfleet, has a whole new crew, including a Klingon, a former enemy of the Federation, an android fulfilling the Spock role as discussed before, and a no-nonsense captain. A few things are revealed about Picard in the first episode. He is French, and he is not very fond of children. So why, then, did he agree to a command position on a ship that boasts capacity for up to 2,000 souls, including Starfleet personnel, civilians, and their families? Throughout the series, we go from the isolated, no-nonsense Picard to the Picard whom the children of the ship admire, and it seems that the feeling is mutual. Though the shift in his character is slow, I believe a key moment for this story came in the episode The Inner Light. The Inner Light is the 25th episode of the 5th season of The Next Generation. A fan favorite, the episode premiered on June 1st, 1992, just before the Season 5 wrap-up. Now, this is just a quick summary, so if you have the opportunity to watch this beautiful episode, I highly recommend doing so. The episode begins on the Enterprise bridge, where the ship encounters an odd item approaching their vessel in open space. Suddenly, there is a flash, and the captain is unconscious. He wakes up on a strange planet called Catan, with a woman named Eileen, who claims to be his wife, and he also meets a man named Bataille, who is the community leader for the town called Resic, where Picard finds himself. He learns that he is not known as Picard here, but rather Cayman, that his profession is an iron weaver, and he plays an instrument called the Resican flute. He is also told that he isn't a really good musician. Cayman, at first, is an outsider, and he spends much of his time trying to find ways to communicate with Enterprise and to figure out where this planet is. But slowly he begins to embrace his life on Catan, as he tries to save its people, and eventually his own family, from a climate disaster. Ultimately, this proves impossible, as the planet experiences immense amount of radiation from its star going nova. Some years after the death of his wife, it is revealed to Cayman that the entire life that he just lived was some sort of illusion. His entire family and all of his friends had been dead for centuries. This was the people of Catan's hope, to find an individual in the future who could share their culture with the universe, as there was no way for the people of Catan to save themselves. The captain wakes up on the Enterprise bridge. The life he experienced, which seemed like decades, had only lasted about 20 minutes. The Resican flute is an important element in this episode. At first, Cayman plays Farajaka on the instrument, a tune that Picard would be familiar with from his childhood on Earth in France, and this shows his continued connection to the Enterprise as opposed to Catan.
You've been brooding behind that flute all evening.
I'm not brooding. I'm immersed in my music.
As he becomes more comfortable on Catan, and with the instrument, he begins to play what can be understood as traditional Resican music. This melody, written by Jay Chataway, is beloved by fans and is one of the most requested pieces from the Star Trek catalog.
Marable, this is your brother's ceremony. Don't fidget now.
But why? Why was it necessary to hijack an individual's consciousness? Couldn't the people of Catan have come up with a better way to convey their culture and story? Perhaps they could have done something similar to what humans did in the 1970s on Voyager 1. Voyager 1 was launched in 1977 and contained on board a golden record with information on our race and where our planet is located. It also has music from all over the world, from Beethoven's Fifth Symphony to Peruvian panpipes. The thought was that if another sentient race were to encounter Voyager, they could use the records to learn more about us, and perhaps gain a deeper understanding of humanity through our music. However, there is very little context to the music. Without knowing human cultures and how they evolved from one another, an alien people could not pick up on the nuances that connect Beethoven to Louis Armstrong, even if they were able to perceive the music as more than just noise. The people of Catan, too, might have wanted more cultural context for their music. This is not just an issue seen in trying to communicate with other species in the future, in space, but can be seen in our modern-day lack of understanding of human culture's past on Earth. Take, for example, discoveries of ancient instruments, like this bone flute that dates back some 35,000 years. What we can learn from these finds are what the instrument themselves sound like, their sound quality, what notes they play, and so forth. But we do not know for what they were used, like leisure or ceremony, or what music on them sounded like. Were florid melodies played on them, or simple tunes to accompany singing, or perhaps they were used as drones. We have no written music that we can decipher to determine this instrument's purpose. If the people of Catan had simply placed the Reskin flute in the probe and hoped it would be intercepted, their culture would not have been kept alive. It would have created an artifact. And even in our historical record, when we get to the point where we do have written music, it can take decades of research to decipher and learn how to play it, like in the case of ancient Greek aulos playing. Even the best efforts leave room for a lot of interpretation, because the way these performers and researchers create performances is based on contemporary writings about the music. And often, all of the source material, whether in writing or the actual music, is not preserved. It is unclear whether there even was a Resican music writing system, though their culture is literate, and this can be seen through Picard taking notes and writing on walls. If there were music, however, that was included in the probe with the flute, it could take whoever found it years, perhaps decades or centuries, to decode it, and even then, it could be completely wrong. When we get to the point where the music looks like music to a Western musician, there is still a lot of room for interpretation. In the case of medieval and Baroque music, a lot of details were left off of the page by composers, simply because it was understood that musicians would know how to interpret their music. Add a grace note here, accent this note in the phrase, play the repeat piano instead of forte, and retard at this point. Take this violin one part of Bach's Brandenburg Concerto No. 3. It looks like music and can be read by a musician, but compared to the violin one part of Brahms' Symphony No. 1, which has phrasing and a lot more dynamic markings, it looks bare. Because there are no recordings of music from the time of Bach, and also because his music was largely abandoned for about 100 years, there is much debate on how to play his music. Because of this, Bach's music provides versatility, meaning that it can be reimagined for modern players and audiences. But there are those who wish to create authentic performances, or as close as they can get. Here are clips from two different modern performances of Bach's Third Brandenburg. The first is played on modern instruments with a more modern interpretation of phrasing. This second one is performed on period instruments, creating a more mellow sound. The accented notes in the phrase are also slightly different. The people of Catan wanted their culture to not just be known, but remembered. They wanted an individual who could create authentic Resican music because they were authentically Resican. They wanted someone who had walked their streets, participated in their rituals, and known their struggles. This was the only way that they knew how. Which leads us back to Picard, the authentic Resican. Having lived a full life on Catan, he struggles at first with the loss of his family and world, coming to terms with the fact that it was all an illusion. This is summed up in the last scene of The Inner Light, where Picard receives the Resican flute in his quarters. He plays the Resican lullaby, but the lighting and atmosphere turn it from a song of hope, of new life, to one of mourning and death. The flute playing continues as the Enterprise moves off to its next adventure, a dramatic departure from the usual fanfare that accompanies this shot. These two are the last of their culture, Picard and the Resican flute.
Come.
Hello, sir. Feeling better?
Yes. Yes, thank you. But I find that I'm having to rediscover that this is really my home.
We were able to open the probe and examine it. Apparently, whatever had locked on to you must have been self-terminating. It isn't functioning any longer. We found this inside.
Picard's isolation continues. The crew is aware of Picard's Resican flute, as he did have to file a report, and obviously they found the flute in the probe. But he hides it away for a few possible reasons. There could be a lot of pain that the captain experiences when he plays, and he believes that no one else on the ship could possibly relate to him. He could also be trying to keep up appearances, maintaining the tough, formal persona that he has established. Either way, it seems that he is not doing what the people of Catan asked him to do, share their culture with the universe. In fact, it seems that he is selfishly harboring away this culture. The episode Lessons offers Picard an opportunity to share this culture, this music, as he lets down his walls and forms a romantic relationship with Lieutenant Nella Darren, a stellar cartographer and pianist. They play duets throughout the episode, including Farajaka, and she encourages Picard to try new things on the Resican flute. Picard becomes so comfortable with her that he even plays the lullaby from The Inner Light, which turns into a duet.
Beautiful. What is it?
It's, an old folk melody.
I've never heard you play with such feeling.
This storyline doesn't end with the next generation. In 2020, the captain's story continued in a new series simply called Picard. For the title sequence, the composer, Jeff Russo, used elements from the episode The Inner Light, but not in a way you would suspect. It begins with an excerpt from the Next Generation theme, but played on piccolo instead of brass. Then the melody is picked up by the cello. It may sound like an original melody, however, it comes from a piece Cayman's son can be heard playing in the background during a scene. I know it may be hard to hear, but listen to the music behind the dialogue.
He loves playing. He's quite good at it, don't you think?
And he loves doing a lot of things.
Now, listen to the cello play the same phrase. So, did Picard fail the people of Catan? If the storyline of the Ruskin flute stopped at the end of The Inner Light, or with Picard in isolation, then I would say yes. The people of Catan were not asking him to quit his job and become an anthropologist specializing in Ruskin culture, or to teach Ruskin flute lessons to the general public. But they did wish for him to share their culture. He could not do this in isolation. However, the fact that he shared the music with Nella in lessons changes everything. We do not know where Nella ended up after this episode, but it is possible that wherever she ended up, she shared the music and what Picard told her about Catan with others. And even if she didn't, the relationship allowed Picard to feel less isolated, to be more open to future relationships, and to process some of the grief he may have felt about his life on Catan. But perhaps Picard's way of sharing the culture of Catan was not through concerts, but rather through the way he advocated for endangered civilizations, as seen in Picard. Picard risked his entire Starfleet career on saving the Romulans, a Federation enemy, when their sun turned into a black hole. He was instrumental in relocating many Romulans from their home world to new planets. He also advocated for synthetic life forms who were banned, standing up for them to the point that he was asked to resign his commission. What he learned from his time on Catan was not just how to play a flute, but how it feels to be a part of a doomed civilization. And Picard used that experience to try and keep other civilizations from going in the same direction, so others would not feel the same isolation that he felt. I would like to thank Professor Sterling Lambert for being my mentor on this project, the entire music faculty at St. Mary's College of Maryland, and my family, of course, and my friends for putting up with me for the past year, ranting and fangirling about Star Trek.